talking about this evening, namely the Brazilian favelas. What are these units of pacifying police, and how do we go about it? What can we do now? Before saying anything, I would like actually to hear from you. Have you ever been inside a favela? Have you ever seen one? Those who have not, how do you imagine it? How do you picture a favela in Brazil? Like, try to create that picture.
Noisy.
Noisy? That's everywhere.
Overpopulated.
Okay,
Yeah.
overpopulated, that's one element.
Smiling people.
But also,
Fighting. Crime.
that's actually the picture that many people in Brazil and abroad have of favelas. But there is much more to it. And I don't think anywhere in the world, and especially not in Brazil, we can talk of favelas as one thing, and one thing only. And the reason why I chose this topic for this evening is also because recently you may have started to hear about the World Cup and the Olympic Games and all of these events that are going to be held in Brazil. And it's only natural that people have fears or expectations, or they picture the country, or more specifically, which is where I would like to focus tonight, in the city of Rio de Janeiro, they have a picture of it. And how are you going to make sure that whoever is coming to the country, or the events that we're going to host, how can we make sure that they are up to international standards? We'll talk a little bit more, but it's basically the motivation behind everything that came after. And I would focus in Rio de Janeiro for mainly two reasons. One, because these favelas, how we call slums or shanty towns, became almost iconic already. Everyone has seen a picture of, has heard stories, true or not, but they have a picture of how it looks like. In Brazil, this is the place where you have the highest number of people in absolute numbers living in favelas. It's in the city of Rio de Janeiro, not in percentage, but in absolute numbers. And also because this is where this pilot project started of the pacifying police units. And we will get there. But before going specifically to this part of the world, I would like to talk in general terms a little bit about what is a favela, or what is a shanty town. What constitutes a favela? What characterizes a favela? The United Nations Habitat, which is this branch of the United Nations that takes care of housing and development when it comes in terms of infrastructure, has developed a set of criteria or principles or elements, let's say, that can be used to classify what is a favela, what is not, what is a shanty town in that sense. And there are these 5 elements that I put here for you. And for a house to be considered substandard living, or a group of houses then you would call a shanty town to be considered of substandard living, it only needs to match one of those criteria. It's not about having all 5. So if one of these things happens or exists or does not exist, when you will see, then we're talking about a shanty town, or then we're talking about substandard living. And a lot of discussion will come, but I will tell you about that first, and you can think for yourselves if this is enough or it's not. So one thing is there sufficient living space in that house for everybody? The UN says sufficient living space is not more than 3 people sharing a room. Go to a country like Japan, for instance, where the standards of life are very high, but there's not enough space, and you might start questioning if this is really the best way to define it. Or, for instance, you can talk about, is this house built in a way that prevents people from external conditions or external climate conditions? That would be another criteria. So, in Brazil, I could relate it to those tin roof houses, or houses that are built with holes and wooden planks, and that would not be enough to protect people in case of a heavy rain, for instance. But then again, where exactly something can be considered adequate for the living conditions of that country or not will change. So these are more general concepts or criteria that the UN will set, but it depends actually on the UNDP offices on each country to measure it a little bit more accurately. Another thing is there access to water, easy access to water, and in fair or affordable prices. It's not enough to just be able to buy water, okay, but what about the people who cannot spend a third or what of their income in water? A fourth element would be, is there basic sanitation or access to sanitation in those houses? And again, if you were talking about a toilet, it can be external or internal, the UN makes no difference. So if a house has external toilets, for instance, it's still okay, as long as it's shared by a reasonable number of persons. And this is what the law, or in a way the regulation of the UN says. What is a reasonable number of persons? Again, it's subject of discussion. And finally, do we have security of tenure? Do I have the papers to prove that this house is mine, that this belongs to me, and therefore I cannot be evicted that easily? Or do I not? And this is actually one of the biggest issues in Brazil, for instance. How did it happen that so many people, in Brazil we can say that 5% up to 6%, it's not so sure, of the population lives in favelas, in what we characterize favelas. It's a lot of people if you think we are 200 million. So when you look at real numbers, this is a lot of people. And how did this happen? How is it that suddenly you have so many people living in those conditions? This will change everywhere else in the world, but in Brazil what I can say is like more general terms, for me it's lack of political interest. Especially in the northeastern part of the country, is the agricultural part of the country. In the 50s and in the 40s, people suffered a lot from drought. And it's either I find something to eat, or I go to the big city where I can try to work and I can try to do something. And I arrive in the big city with my 5 or 6 children and everything that I have, and I don't have a place to go. So there is this hill, it looks beautiful. I can try to put something together here and it's working for now. And then I tell a family member or someone hears that and someone knows and people come, and suddenly you have all of these people living. And in Rio de Janeiro, remember, it's just our main focus here, this is mainly in hills, because these were the parts of the city where people did not want to go for access, for infrastructure. It was just harder to access. So these people started to build their houses in the hills. More historically, we've had the last war in our territory. It happened in 1897, and lots of soldiers who fought in this war, once the war was done, came to the government and said, look, we participated in this, we put our lives in the line, what do you have for us? And the government did not have any structure or any kind of compensation to offer to those people. They were in the city of Rio de Janeiro, around 10,000 soldiers. So the government said, okay, we'll turn the blind eye, you can put your houses in here, we cannot offer you anything else, and it became kind of a gentleman's agreement. You can stay there, and that's basically how it grew. And from that to 6% of the Brazilian population, it takes a lot of lack of initiative to see what are the conditions that these people are living in. In the world nowadays, just as a matter of comparison, we have 1 billion people living in what can be considered favelas or shanty towns. By 2030, not so far away from now, the UN estimates that this number will reach 2 billion people. So not only we are giving birth to more people, the population on the earth is increasing, but so is increasing inequality. And there is something in there that is not working. What is it? Because now we have more access to technology, now we know more about how we can do things differently, and yet this number is about to double in 15 years or a little bit more than that. So this is kind of the state of the art, if we can talk about it in general terms, and also in Brazil. But what I would like to focus a little bit on is now starting to talk about how is it to live in such a place. What is a favela and how do people live there? What is it that they do? Who lives in those places? And I have a little bit the social profile, if we can talk about it, and also some social indicators to show or to give you a better picture of what is a favela. If we compare the population, the Brazilian population living in favelas to the rest of the country, if we compare them to the general numbers of the country, they are younger people and they are black. In Brazil, the average age of a Brazilian is 32 years old. In a favela is 28, so they are a little bit younger. Brazilian population is 45% constituted by black people. In a favela, this number reaches 75%. So you can see that you start to create a profile of who ends up being there. And then you can discuss all sorts of social debts that we've had since slavery was over in the country, issues of classicism and racism. But I'm not here to talk about the historical formation of Brazil, but just to give you an idea that it's a problem that has a tag, that it's easy to identify, and therefore would be easy to understand how to transform it, or at least what are the ways we can empower, who should we empower, what should we talk about here. So that would be more or less the social profile of the person who lives in these favelas, generally in all the country. But there are also some social indicators. What do they do? Are these people literate, are not literate? What is the access to education that they have? Are we talking about sanitation? Are we talking about access to adequate water? What is it? So to talk about that in general terms would not make much sense, but what I would like to tell you is just to be aware that internally or between favelas there are also many differences. So, if we consider a favela in the city of Rio de Janeiro, for instance, they have better social indicators, people living in a favela, than certain states in the north of the country. If you consider just the population of a favela. Why? Because people who are in a favela in Rio de Janeiro, and if you've seen it's in the heart of the city. It's in the middle of all the services. They are close to a structure of a very economic booming city. That's why people chose to stay there, even though they did not have the adequate papers for their house, even though the house could not be as big as they wanted, but because they knew they were close to the economic centers. So in São Paulo and in Rio de Janeiro, it's more interesting for people to be there where they are with the problems that they have, but they know that it's close to a working place. They know it's close to a better school. So when you look at social indicators, for instance, rates of literacy will be higher than in states in the north of the country, for instance. And just to prove a little bit of these internal differences, it's maybe not as interesting to talk about places that you've never heard, so just try to understand that you will have a favela. You look at favelas in the city of Maceió, and 25% of the people living there are illiterate. But you look at the whole group of favelas in the city of Belém, and it's only 4%. And this can be explained really a little bit by that, the proximity that they have in these favelas to centers, economic centers, educational centers. And it also shows why everything that was done and thought before about relocating those people, let's take these things down, let's put them somewhere else, why would they be happy about that? Why would they trust or rely in a government that did not take care of them all of these years and now wants to send them to the outskirts of the city to depend on a public transportation system or to rely on a public transportation system that is not reliable? Not to mention that in Brazil, to relocate someone or a group of people or to relocate people from a community costs 3 times as much than urbanizing the area where they currently live. So if not for everything else, the fact that they are close to where they want to be, they have their social networks already, they are close to their jobs, they are close to a better school, they are close to a better hospital, but it also costs 3 times as much to send them away. So for me, the choice is made already about what do we do with these people. You shouldn't even discuss what do you do with these people. It was your inefficiency as the government that made them be for so long where they are. So now at least have the smart decision to do what is obvious in that situation. And it was finally after the government understood that we cannot talk about relocation. All the projects of relocation that happened before did not work. People would go back. You would build those houses somewhere 3 hours away from where they usually lived. They would sell or they would do whatever, and they would go back to the place that they knew from growing up, because it was not something that they wished to do. So currently in Rio de Janeiro we have more, the number ranges between 1,000 and 1,500 favelas, or groups of houses with inadequate conditions. And it's 22% of the population of the city. It's over 1 million people. Try relocating 1 million people. What do you do with that? You have to see that in this case, there is no other choice than giving the means so that they can remain where they are, but in better conditions. And what is it that we can do? But I also think we wouldn't be talking about these favelas and they wouldn't become so iconic or whatnot if they just were not adequate living in the city, or if they just did not match the rest of the city, or poor people, they deserve better. We would not be talking about these favelas if they did not become as violent as they did. And I don't think I have to defend myself, or I don't think anyone here would disagree, but please feel free to say they disagree, that poverty and violence are not the same thing. Poverty does not equal violence. Just because a community is poor, it doesn't mean that this community will become violent. So what is it that happened then in this context that it allowed these communities to go from a stage of poverty, inadequate housing, and not necessarily the best conditions according to what we've discussed at the UN set, to violence? You can think of many, of course there will always be specific elements, and you can think of many different influences that would lead these communities to become violent communities. There is one theory that I like. It's this collective efficacy theory of Sampson and Roundabush. And it basically says, in very simple terms, that whenever you have a community that has poor standards of structure, let's say that the structure of that community is not strong enough or has deficiency structure. So let's talk about services here. They don't have access to good schools, they don't have access to hospitals, they don't have the basic means of survival, sanitation, housing, structure, really talking about structure. So it's not only enough that these communities don't have decent structure, but when you find that picture, and in addition to that, the means of socialization or the institutes that exist for socialization are weak, when those two elements meet, then violence will breed. And when we're talking about institutes or institutions for socialization, we can talk about the family, we can talk about the school, we can talk about the church, community groups. This can be both traditional and non-traditional groups for socialization. But whenever they are weak, non-existent, or they succumb to the external environment, then violence will breed. And in many different forms. But in here, I'm talking basically about gangs. If you agree that the human beings have a need to survive, and in order to survive, we try to group ourselves into groups that we think match our personality or what we are or how we see ourselves at the moment, because it is the group structure that will help us survive in the external world. And just think about the fact that these institutions of socialization are non-existent in these communities, which is the case in many of those communities. I need to substitute that with something else. I cannot go to my school because, you know, there are fights every day, the school is very bad, the professors don't want to come here because we are in the heart of a favela. The people that live here are not prepared because they were not educated to be our teachers instead. My family is broken. My father is in jail. My mother has to take care of 7 other children. She leaves us here while she has to work. I'm not religious, or I go to the church, but that doesn't give me that many answers, and I'm hungry at the end of the day. I will have to look for something that helps me survive. And that starts with a gang. Because there are no mechanisms, or no mechanisms to control what is happening. There is nothing that tells me otherwise, that this is not how it should be. And from a gang to become an organized criminal group, it's more or less a natural path. So this is what happened in those communities. Like, how could I try to translate a little bit better how violent these communities are to you? I'd like to give you an example. It's not a favela in Rio de Janeiro, it's in Belo Horizonte, but this is a widespread phenomenon in favelas if we're talking about the fact that they are both lacking structure and the institutions of socialization are weak. Then we're talking about that in so many different places. Not to say, and this is important, that every favela is violent. It's not to say that, because some will have better or stronger institutions for socialization than others. But when those two things happen, you can have the case of this Pedreira Prado Lopes favela in Belo Horizonte, which is a place I've studied, I read a little bit about. They have 12,000 people living there, and it's considered one of the most violent favelas in the country. 1 person is murdered every 5 days in a community of 12,000 people. So you know those people. Like, this is next to you. Like, who dies, who is a victim of violence, is just here, is part of a community as we all are. But if you remove, and if you look at the whole city of Belo Horizonte, where this favela is located, let's remove this favela, or the numbers, or the things that happen in there, from the official numbers of the city, and see what happens. You will then see that 1 person in a city of 2.5 million people, which is the case of Belo Horizonte, will be murdered at every 50 days instead of 5. So you know where the problem is. Not to say that the problem is in this favela, let's exclude everyone or let's exterminate this favela, that's not what I mean. But you know that the violence that is generated by this lack of structure and poor social institutions is localized. You can see where it manifests itself. Something that happened for the police in Belo Horizonte decided to investigate for a year, or it was part of the research. They investigated for a year all murders that happened in this community, in Pedreira Prado community. And they concluded that 100% of the murders that happened over the period of 1 year were all related to criminal activity, drug dealing, namely, which is what will happen in these favelas in Rio de Janeiro. All, be it because you owed money to the drug dealer, because you were from an opposing gang, or because you gave information to the police. Not necessarily you were a user, you were unhappy with that situation, you decided to go to the police and inform, but still it's linked to the criminal activity. 100% of all murders have the same explanation or the same origin. So you know what is going on. In Brazil, from 1980 to 2012, a little bit over 1 million people were murdered. We do not have civil wars. We do not have racial issues or gender issues. We do not have differences in different ethnic groups. We do not have border or territorial wars. We are not involved in any conflict anywhere else in the world. And yet, I don't see how a country can exterminate 1 million of its citizens that easily. I mean, from the top of my head, I can only look anywhere else in the world. We talk about conflicts here all the time, and it's so shocking what is happening in Iran, and it's so shocking what is happening in Iraq. I can only think of Congo as a country that has a higher death toll than this 1 million victims over 32 years in Brazil. Congo from 98 up to now, we had 6 million people as victims of the conflict. Nobody talks about it because it's not interesting. It's not a conflict that people discuss. But other than that, I don't understand how so many people can be exterminated in a country and still the situation remains nearly unchanged. I have an explanation. I mean, I cannot understand, but I have an explanation for it. And you will see very easily when I show you who dies of murder in Brazil. It's not that those 1 million murders over a period of 32 years are happening in my family or in my community. Who is dying of murder in Brazil is mainly located in these 4 states, São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Espírito Santo and Pernambuco. Is very, very young, is between 14 and 25 years old, is poor and is black. And in a way is connected to drug trafficking, whether it is use or because they were mistaken by someone, they owed money, or again, like I said, they went to the police and gave some information on that gang. For the government, for whatever reason, that was acceptable because it's not happening at their door. You know, it's not likely to be me or the politician's son or the rich kids, of course, unless they are owing money to the drug dealer, but at least they have better means to pay for it, for whatever is it that they owe. But most of those 1 million people that I just talked about had a very, very similar profile. And that was acceptable. And why is it that suddenly, we talked about gangs and how is it that gangs come to life, and we talked a little bit about this collective efficacy theory, but why is it that a business, drug dealing, suddenly becomes so violent? What is it about it that makes it so violent? I think you all know that this is a business that's incredibly lucrative, disproportionately lucrative. And it's illegal at the same time. So if I have a business and I'm making a lot of money with it and there is high profit from it, I will want to keep that running for a while and I will do whatever I can to protect my territory. So the gangs that we talked about before that were maybe having their grievances because I don't like your face or whatever, now are fighting over the protection of these territories. If I see that you can make X million dollars a year doing that, why can't I try the same? And this fight becomes suddenly very, very violent because we're talking about something that motivates people a lot. And it's the eagerness to control or to keep in control of these territories. Then maybe the obvious question would come. Would it be then, if we talk about decriminalization, that we're solving the problem? I don't know. I mean, I've read a lot. I've thought about this. I've changed my mind. I've changed it back and forth. I don't know how many times. And I still don't know if that would be the answer to reducing the violence rates or to making this business less interesting. And at the same time less violent because you wouldn't have the territory to defend anymore. But this is basically the link that we can make between drug trafficking and violence. Why is it so violent? Well, because I would like to keep my business and I will make I'll do whatever I have to do to defend my territory. So this was basically the scenario. This was the reality of so many of those people that live in these favelas. Until something happened. There is something good coming. Something happened. And I think it's very interesting to talk about what was the motivation to change, to do something different. And I'll start talking a little bit in a while about these units of pacifying police, which is the main concept of this new step or of this change. But all of that was motivated by those two events. Again, discuss it as you want. Shouldn't it be motivation enough, the fact that all of these people are dying and are in conditions that are obviously not ideal for a country? Shouldn't this then be the motivation for the government to do something else? Let's discuss motivation some other time. But the real motivation behind what was done was really the World Cup that we're hosting next year and the Olympic Games that are coming in 2016. When Brazil and the city of Rio de Janeiro decided to create their bids to, present the city as a viable candidate for those committees, this was the number one question. What are you going to do about those favelas? Is it safe to go there? Can we send that many tourists to a country, especially to the city of Rio de Janeiro, when you have all of these favelas around and people don't know where they can go to, they don't know where they cannot go to? So the city created, backed up by the federal government, a plan on what should we do instead, or how can we tackle this problem a little bit differently. Because it's not like they were not trying to fight crime and drug dealing before. They were, of course, doing it, and nothing was being successful. One, because people were afraid to hand in names or to indicate where to go, what to do. And also because you would come in, you would have shootouts, you would kill 5 drug dealers, 2 people who were not drug dealers who just happened to be passing by on that street. You would come out and a week later the whole structure would be in place again. So what could we do different? And then came this basic idea motivated by the chance to host the World Cup and the Olympic Games. And the idea was simple. We need to regain control of these territories. We are outside of the favelas, so if you think about it, most favelas don't have public services like we do in the rest of the country for post office, for instance. If you want your letter or your bills delivered to your house, the post office guy is not going to climb all of those stairs to deliver your letters. You would usually leave it at the bottom of the favela. There is a supermarket or someone has a store, you deliver all of them there and you come pick it up if you want. They wouldn't have regular services for cable TV or regular TV or whatever, because the state was absent for so many years and they just needed to regain control of these territories. If people were even to trust state and state services for the first time. I say regain, but many times they were just trying to gain control or enter a place that they'd never entered before. And how would you do that then? So the plan, the idea, had 4 basic steps. One, the first one, was the whole idea of taking over this territory. So we are coming in and we are taking control. The second step, and I'll tell a little bit more about all of these steps. The second step, once we come in, we need to stabilize whatever is happening here. We need to make sure that the situation then stabilizes itself. The first 2 steps, or the first 2 points, do not relate directly to the units of pacifying police that I will talk about. The units of pacifying police are directly involved on steps 3 and 4, that are the definitive occupation period and the post-occupation period. So, in detail, what would happen? We have a force, or a special force, like the SEALs or the SWAT, or however you want to call it in other countries. In Brazil, it's called BOP. Maybe some of you have seen a movie called Elite Squad. It became very popular in Brazil in 2006 onwards. And it's basically a special police squad. They are the best. They consider themselves to be incorruptible, very well trained, but they are very well trained killers, strategists. So their role is to come and clean a territory, whatever needs to be done. And those people then would make sure that you would remove weapons and whatever kind of artillery that you would find, that you would destroy the points of observation that the criminal groups would create, that you would take over, destroy guns, arrest the drug dealers, and all of that. So we say there are 4 steps, but a lot of people refer to 2 steps, which was basically cleaning and then restarting. But the program in reality has these 4 steps. So once these people or this group would come and clean the territory, then we would bring these units of pacifying police. What are they? They are soldiers that were trained only with this purpose, specifically for this purpose. They were not on the streets before. They did not participate in any type of civilian interaction before, because the idea was that if they are new and if they're trained with this purpose, therefore they are incorruptible. We can tell them how to do things right, and they do not have the ways of the street already, in a way. They did not have the time to be approached by a drug dealer saying, okay, you make 2,000 a month, what about 10 for you to keep your mouth shut and your family alive? So these ties would not be created if you would have these people coming into these communities after they were cleaned. So the drug dealers are not there anymore physically. They're not there to impose or to threaten anyone. And the whole idea was basically that those people stay there forever, for as long as it's needed for this community to regain the way of functioning, for these communities to finally have right structures, and for them to have the opportunities to have their capacities developed. And when we talk about the post-occupation, is okay, we're being occupied and that's it? No, you have to do something else. This relates to another part of this project that is called UPP. It's the Units of Pacifying Police Social. We'll talk a little bit about that soon. But the basic idea of the program was that, if you can think or remember 2 steps, we clean, now we put these guys in here. And what is it exactly that these units of pacifying police do? How are they constituted? And this, I think, is maybe the most interesting thing, because all of us can relate to it somehow. I mean, when I talk about Brazil and the favela, it's interesting as a story, but it's not part of the reality of so many people. But the way we think about the police and how do we understand the roles of the police force is something that you can maybe translate to several different realities. In Brazil, again, this is a very interesting point, because in the country we have a history of police brutality that's very high. So when you come and you say to these people living in favelas, we're going to bring these police officers here, and you have to trust them. They are here to maintain peace and security for you. They are here to make sure that now you have access to the social structures that you did not have before. Everyone was a little bit suspicious, and I can understand. Because you can look, Human Rights Watch has done a beautiful work in documenting police brutality in Brazil, and extrajudicial killings, for instance, and profiling of persons depending on where they come from, and the whole approach, it's still very problematic. And in a way, it's so problematic because it is backed up by the Brazilian population. Something that I hear a lot, and I heard in university all of my life. We had classes on human rights, and then you would have people coming from a similar background as me, so a little bit more privileged than everyone else, who would say, what is this thing with human rights? Human rights is here to defend criminals. We need human rights for the right humans. And this is something they would say all the time. And it translates. It's a culture that develops into the way we look at the police and what is the role of the police and how we accept the interventions that are done or that are not done. So to change this profile was the biggest challenge for me of this whole program. So what was the idea behind these concepts of units of pacifying police? They needed a police that is called the proximity police. It's similar to the idea of the community police or community watch in a way. Not community watch as in any member of community can come and make sure people are not invading. That's not it. It's really a trained, institutionalized police force, but that stays in the community for whatever happens. So it's a little bit inverting the traditional logic of a police. How do we measure efficiency in police force? You commit a crime, I find out who it is, I get that person, I put it in jail. Therefore I'm good because I can identify who is the criminal and I can take that person to jail. But what if you don't have to take persons to jail because you know that community so well that you are able to identify the problems before they become a real issue? So the idea of proximity police is to be there in that community, talking to people, understanding what are their problems, and discussing with them what are the most adequate ways to deal with that problem. If I know, for instance, that there is a drug user, I will start looking at that guy or those group of people not as criminals who deserve to be sent to jail, but rather as a problem of public health, and that is someone who needs assistance in some way. So you change the approach. There are some, let's say, elements or principles of what we call this proximity police, and it's these 6 elements that you see here. It's a police force that is proactive. I come to the community before someone is murdered. I come to the community before someone is robbed. So I understand what are the dynamics there. Who has information? Like people. And what is the best way to get access to information? Talking to people. So if I can get them to talk to me, to say what they're unhappy with, I become then preventive because I can address problems before they actually become widespread in that community. And it's not, again, this is something I would link to the point of being educational. It's not that I see a behavior that we are unhappy with and therefore I have to be repressive. It's not crime and punishment, but crime and, or deviation, let's say, and education. Okay, what is the consequence of behaving this way? We come here to show different ways to do it. And all of this is possible because this is focused on citizenship and it's also transparent. So the communities that have these units of pacifying police, they hold meetings, regular meetings with the community where they discuss what is going on, what are the problems that you have, and how would you like to deal with that. It's this whole idea of citizenship. You're all citizens. You're all here to contribute on how we look at that. So how would you like to do it? And it's focused on the public spaces, but also on the social elements. So for instance, all of these communities where you have these units installed in Brazil today also have events, police forces organize events of martial arts. It's something that's becoming very popular in Brazil now. All communities have a center of martial arts where the kids can train with professors that are from the police force. You have painting activities, you have music activities, and the policemen are involved in all of these activities so that people know their names, they trust them, they know where to come to when they have a problem. There was this woman and she was talking about, she was pregnant, and just to show how efficient this actually became, people indeed trusted very much. And I see it as a very successful model because you show your presence there and it's really a different kind of presence. The program started in 2008, so there's some time now for people to get used to it. So this woman was pregnant and well, her water broke and she was about to deliver the baby. what's the first thing I can do? I can go to the unit of Pacifying Police and this police officer will take care of me, and they did. I'll talk a little bit about what is it actually that they do, because their idea, if you're preventive and if you're proactive, the number or the type of interventions or crimes or events that will happen are different than what you were used to deal with before. You're not talking about drug dealing anymore, you're not talking about defending this territory, because the BOPI, it's this unit that I talked before, really comes and scares these drug dealers away massively. And the difference is that now they have a plan on what to do after. So we're not just coming, scaring you away and leaving and you come back. No, now we're having to understand these communities in a different way so that this is sustainable. We'll discuss how sustainable or not it really is, but it is a successful experience. One thing that's also interesting is that these police officers that are part of these units of Pacifying Police have a different profile of the average police force in societies. Like I said, they are trained specifically for that, so they were not on the streets before. There is an ideology, or let's say there is a theory behind this whole concept. So people invest, people believe a little bit more in this concept of police than in everything that you had before, especially when you think of brutality, extrajudicial killings and all of that. So 40% of the members of this police have finished university. When you look at Brazil in general, this is actually very high for a police force. So they studied law, they studied sociology, they studied math, they studied whatever. But they had access to more education or more years of education, a little bit more theory, more socialization than the guys that came before them. And they are also low middle class families. Does that make a difference? Yes, in the sense that they are in a little bit better situation than the people who are living in these favelas. But they didn't lose touch with reality. They know how it is to live in a condition where you don't have necessarily everything that you would like to. So you can empathize a little bit better, or you can identify a little bit more. And you see problems in more or less the same way that they do. And specifically, they have had trainings in human rights and civilian approach. And you could ask me, wow, isn't it obvious that all police officers should have training in that? Well, it's not, because that's not how it was done before. What I do know is that Switzerland is also doing similar trainings with their police force currently. They are working in reshaping the training of police, not because there was a history of police brutality, you know this better than me, but because Swiss society is changing. And now they have to understand, police officers have to understand the Swiss country or society as being a little bit more multicultural than what it was before. So different problems will appear, different issues will be raised, and how do we deal with that? So the concept is not so far away from this reality. It's really about understanding who these people are, where they come from, being more participative and engaging in activities with them, so that we know a little bit better what to do. And then you will, I can show you a little bit, a few pictures, and then I would like to connect with the whole video of Michael Jackson that I was showing before. So that was the concept. This is what we would like to do. This is the police force that we have in mind. You've seen how this whole project works. You come in and you clean this territory, and you then install this police that will be proactive and present. So we need a place to test. The concept is there. Where do we go first? And what I'm going to show you is the first favela in Rio de Janeiro where this project was implemented. And it is Morro, the favela of Santa Marta. And maybe it's completely new for you, but it is the favela where that video of Michael Jackson was shot. They don't care about us. The video was shot in 1995, so the favela was not pacified yet. This happened in 2008. But just to make a link, or to create a little bit of a picture of what is it, where are we talking about. At the time, Michael Jackson and Spike Lee, who directed the video, asked for authorization of the city to shoot that video. And they denied. They said, no, we don't want you to do this here because it will stain or it will create a bad image of how the city of Rio de Janeiro looks like. As if the bad image is not already created by their own inefficiency of handling their own problems. So they appealed, and finally a judge or in a higher court said, no, it's fine, you can do the video. But that was not the most important okay that they needed. They needed to talk to the drug dealer, the boss of the favela. It doesn't matter if the city says, come, and I come with all of these bunch of foreigners coming up. Why would I allow this to happen here? But they did, and they asked for authorization, and the owner, if we can call it like that, that's how they call them, the owner of the favela, Marcinho VP, authorized, and not only authorized, but guaranteed that nothing was going to happen to anyone involved in the shooting or anyone in the community, and nothing did. Because those people, something that we need to think about, the people that live in the favelas, many of them grew up there, are from there, and they care about their communities. They care about the people who are living there. They just have a structure in place to guarantee that their business continues to run. So it's not like they are going to invade people's homes and rob them or attack them or do anything. As long as you let my business run fine, we are going to protect you as well. So that's why for so many years the people in these communities were silent. Because if the government is not protecting me, if the government is not doing anything, who can I trust? This guy at least is guaranteeing that I'm not shot tomorrow. And that is how this relationship more or less happened for so many years. And in this community, it's something very interesting. This drug dealer, this owner, Marcinho VP, he was involved with a Brazilian journalist who would like to understand a little bit more about his reality, tell the story. So they collaborated and wrote a book. And it's a brilliant book. It's very blunt and honest, but it's a brilliant book. And the title, I think, is the most genius thing, because in Portuguese it's called Abusado, and then the owner of the Santa Marta Hill. And abusado in Portuguese can have two different meanings. Something like cheeky, or someone that does not really respect authority and is bold and, yeah, cheeky, sassy. But it also means abused by the structure, or abused by the lack of structure that is in his surroundings. So who is this guy? Like, who are those people? They are not just criminals who come here and want to do that because there's nothing else for them to do in life. Well, they are a victim of their own environment. And by putting these structures or these units of pacifying police in place, what you're doing is not just exterminating, killing, and putting them away, but trying to guarantee that more Marcinho VPs won't come to life, because they are being now nurtured, or their capacities have better opportunities to be developed in different ways. So what I would like to show you briefly is just some pictures of this community. So this is the entrance of the Santa Marta community. You can see some buildings, a lot of irregular electricity. So this is not how it looks like in the rest of the city. You can see some color as well. You can see art, and people find their ways to manifest themselves. And you can see their view, which for me is the most beautiful view in the city of Rio de Janeiro. This is the view of the favela, so I can understand if people don't want to be sent 3 hours away from where they live. And of course a soccer field, because otherwise it would not be in Brazil. So this picture is not from there, it's from Complexo do Alemão. This was actually another favela that was taken by this project. As of January this year, 30 favelas in Rio de Janeiro. Remember we talked about 1,000 plus, but again, only a third only. But a third of the favelas that exist in Rio de Janeiro are dominated either by drug dealers or militias. that are former police officers, former firefighters, who go to these communities and try to regain control. There's no such thing as drug dealing, but they will charge people for services. So if you would like to have water or gas delivered in your house, for every one of those you have to pay me 2 francs or whatever. And this is how they maintain their control. Interesting enough, all the units of Pacifying Police that were installed, and we have 30 as of January, but 2 more happened last week, so it might be 32 out of 1,000, but all of those are not involved with militias. They are all with drug dealers. Because the police force still didn't find a way to tackle their own former members. They think similarly. So they still don't know how to approach the communities that are dominated by militias, because whatever we do, these guys might know what we're planning to do. So we need to be a little bit more careful. This one is considered one of the most iconic that happened, because everyone who's been to Rio de Janeiro, and if you talk to people for many years, they all said this is the place that police will never gain control of, because it's just too big. And the factions or the criminal organizations that are in here are too strong. 2 weeks before the operation happened, they shot down police helicopters to show that, look, whatever you do, we are strong as well. But they actually took control of the territory with the help of the army. And if this is not a civil war, then I don't know what it is a civil war anymore. But a very symbolic act that they did, that BOPE did, this special operations group, is when they reached the top of the favela, and there is a church there, that's a lot of people go there. They placed the Brazilian flag, and they placed the flag of the state of Rio de Janeiro. Almost to say, this is Brazilian territory. This belongs to all of us, not just to whoever sees himself as the leader of this group. The approach, so I showed you the first one, the approach more or less changed. Before they would come in unannounced and fight with whoever was there and shoot people, and people were killed in these operations. Afterwards, they thought, okay, let's be a little bit smarter. Let's announce when we come. If they want, they surrender. They leave their arms and they leave whatever is it that they do. We tell the people who live in these communities, the civilians, that they can go to a friend or like family house somewhere else if they want to avoid being in the middle of whatever might happen here, so that civilians are not harmed. So the last operations happened without any shots or anything, bullets being fired, nothing. Because they are not stupid. Drug dealers are not dumb. They have their life and they want to protect it as well. And if you see that this is coming to you, you don't want to lose control of your business. So something that's very interesting is that you can see nowadays that communities that were very violent before are trying to keep a low profile. Or the drug dealers themselves are trying to find their way to prevent crime in these communities, because you don't want to be the next one that the police comes into, because then you're losing your business. Once this force comes in, I mean, this is just a list. I mean, I won't talk about all of this, but just for you to have an idea, what is it that they do there? The units of Pacifying Police, once they are installed, what are the things that they deal with now? It's everyday, mundane things. So they try to mediate conflicts about the residents of the area. They organize activities for the children or for the members of this community. They also act a lot trying to reduce domestic violence, because this is an issue in these communities and everywhere you look. Develop education, you can look here. They identify community problems. When it's not something that the police force is responsible for, then they redirect to the right public agent. So because the units of Pacifying Police are there and people start identifying with them, it's something that happens, that they believe these units solve everything. So you come to them and say, look, I have this issue, my street is not paved. Okay, so let's redirect that to the responsible organ. And this is basically what they do. Most frequent complaints, like what happens in these communities now that these drug dealers are gone. Most frequent complaint is noise. I would like to sleep and there is a party and I just don't know what to do. Then it's fights between residents. You called me this, I called you that, now prove, and. And domestic violence, of course. Less frequent complaint, murders are virtually non-existent in these communities as of now, really are virtually non-existent. Sexual abuse, robbery, they are basically gone in these communities. Not to say that it is perfect, because there are lots of fears. Still, something you can notice when you talk to people is the fear of retaliation. Even though these drug dealers are gone, if I come to you and I ask, who was the guy who did this? They won't say. Because you don't know if these guys are coming back. This is a fear, and I can understand, I can relate, because the government's just not that trustworthy anyway. Will this go past the Olympic Games? Is this something that they're trying to do just so that the city is fine and well for when the games happen? And what about us when the games are gone? The governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro says, no, but the population can trust, but what about budget? It's always the number one excuse, we don't have the budget to do that anymore. And something that you can notice already is that after we won both bids and after he was re-elected, the number of occupations decreased. They will say, and this is also true, that it's because it takes a lot of time to train new soldiers, and until the time they are done and you can put them into these communities, it takes some time. Yes, but the fear is there. We've had the first violent episode in Morro da Mangueira, one of the favelas that has one of these units. A police officer, a woman, was shot and was murdered by someone. Probably a drug dealer, unhappy with the fact that he could not deal with his territory anymore. But this was the first episode of violence in those 30 communities that are being now part of this project. And it makes you wonder, like, how sustainable this is. Was this used as an electoral tool or not? It became sort of a running joke in Brazil. We were watching the debate for governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro, and this was already in place. And someone would ask a question, or the opponent would ask a question, so how do you, an example, how do you plan to tackle the problem of bad roads? Oh, we created the units of Pacifying Police, and everything is going to be fine, as if the roads are going to sort themselves out. How do you deal with the issue of education? The units of Pacifying Police, they educate I mean, there is a limit to how much you can use that to convey your message, or are you really using this as an electoral tool or not? Not to mention that what I took a little bit of my time already, but I promise I'll be brief. That what happened in many of these communities when they come and they push these drug dealers away, they don't disappear. You arrest some, but so many run away for somewhere else. And where are they going? And in Rio de Janeiro, you can notice as how it's skyrocketing violence outside the city, in the close-by cities, as if you just transferred the problem from one part of the city to another. Is it that they're not doing anything? No. The fourth part of the project, the fourth part of the program is called UPP Social, and it's basically about bringing social services for these victims, both the drug dealers or the children or those close-by communities that are interested, and also the people that live in these communities, to offer them opportunities so that they can be educated, there's better health, there is no basic sanitation, jobs, housing. So in Favela do Alemão, that one that I showed with the flag, now they have a program for tourism. It's something that really increased a lot in this community. People like to go and stay in this hotel, like little hotels or B&Bs, and see how is life there. Business really, really improved in these communities a lot. And you can only enroll in this program if you are really a member of that community, to guarantee that you will have an opportunity to have a job. But this takes time. So you took away those people from these communities now, but it takes a lot of time so that someone can stand back on their feet again. And what do you do in between? Maybe you just have to deal with the fact that for now they will run somewhere else, and you can try to balance and counteract in hopes that these programs will, in 10, 15 years, be able to shift the society a little bit more. The money is there, like in a year, no, 2 years, the whole 2009, the whole 2010, they invested 500 million Swiss francs in those projects of UPP Social for better education, for sanitation, for job creation. But just to throw money at a problem is not going to solve the problem. You need some adequate planning, you need a follow-up. And because it was done so fast in order to try to solve so quickly a problem, so we could see that it was working, there are still lots of things that you could adjust. 3 questions. Is life in these communities that we could implement these projects better? Absolutely, like I cannot even compare. If you look at Favela Santa Marta, people on the streets, doing whatever they want, interacting. It's a favela that has wireless for all the residents, better opportunities, groups for theater, for dance, for music, for everything. Not to mention, like I said, that crime is really, really reduced in those communities. Is it perfect? Obviously not. And can it be improved? Absolutely. So this is where you need to make sure that the program keeps going. And finally, just as a conclusion, what do we see as successes and what do we see as challenges in here? Clearly, life is different in these communities, and clearly drug dealing is not anymore heavy, armed, open face as it used to be. Is drug dealing gone? No. I mean, it's not gone here. Go around Gundali and there is drug dealing, but they find different ways. If you modernize, for instance, if now you phone the drug dealer or whatever, and he brings the drug for you, you don't need to protect the territory anymore. And this is how it's been done in so many different countries. You phone the drug dealer and they do that for you. But it is not heavy armed territory fight defense anymore. Other crimes are very, very low. They were before, because drug dealers are also not tolerant with rape and sexual crimes, for instance. But still, other crimes are very, very low in these communities. This presence, the fact that the drug dealers are gone, but the UPP, or these units, remain, prevents militia from coming in and prevents these drug dealers from returning. So there is some sense of security, and no, not just a sense, there is some security in these communities. Like I said, social services are way more present, so there's better schools, better education program for these people. Better business opportunities. Businesses are indeed thriving, and it's from people from those communities. It's not someone now sees a business opportunity from outside, comes there and makes money on those people. No, it's really the people who are there before also have their entrepreneurship spirit and want to make their communities better. And for me, the most important thing about this whole program is that it created a momentum to discuss issues of classicism, of racism in the city, so divided as the city of Rio de Janeiro. And most importantly as well, it lets us think of police intervention a little bit differently. Obviously, you cannot do that in 1,000 favelas. If, let's say, we had 1,500, if you would implement a unit of pacifying police every month in a different favela, 100 years would not be enough, literally. In 100 years, you could not finish this work. So this is obviously not how we can tackle this issue. What are the problems? Again, these issues of political interest. What guarantees that once it's not interesting anymore for politicians, that this project will remain. If these people stay in these communities for so long, which is the objective, then they might become too much of a familiar face to allow corruption to come in and start. So how do we prevent that? It's again like a more general discussion or something to think about. On a positive note, there was an episode of corruption that was found out in one of these favelas, and it was not taken lightly as it was before in Brazil. So the intent to do things differently is there. So there is also that hope. And for me, the big question, like how effective is this? We need to change the way we think about state presence. We need to change the way we think about security and interaction. Because like I said, obviously, we cannot come into 1,000 communities, and how many police officers are with everyone in Brazil will become a police officer, if that's the thing, to bring them to these communities. So, what is the best way to prevent crime? For me, it's to prevent criminals. So if you do not give people the room to become a criminal, chances are that crime will decrease a lot. So it's really about looking at those people as material for growth and looking at state presence differently, as instead of controlling what happens in this community, instead of banning the behavior that they don't want, but rather to change the attitude and the way we interact so that people can really put their best and develop their capacities in the best way. So this is a little bit of the experience, and I hope it's interesting, and let's see what happens in the future. I hope it's a very good picture, as positive as this one that I'm starting to talk about, with all the ifs, buts, and questions. So thank you for listening. I'm ready for questions.